What everything?
Of Western mysticism.
Okay.
Because
And
it's not,
before we get into that, I have a question for you about your friends that have converted to either Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, based on your kind of assessment of that time period in their lives. Do you have an idea of why they did that? I mean, I also have friends who have done that, and so I'm curious as to your observations.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, knowing American evangelicalism, I don't blame it. So, but that of course, in one way, always takes the second look.
Well, and so, but when you said knowing Western evangelicalism, you don't blame them. Okay, that's a very inside statement, as though everybody's going to automatically understand what you mean. So, what is it about Western evangelicalism that is missing, or that is on the wrong trajectory, that would cause someone to go and convert to Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, in your opinion?
There's many different streams to it. It could be the sacramental. It could be the John Henry Newman argument, because he was an Oxford Anglican, and he said, well, if you want to make yourself a historical Christian, you have to convert to Roman Catholicism. That's what he did. He's of that sort. There's the mystical, the ones who want to get more into understanding. Of course, Meister Eckhart was condemned, and I can talk all about that, by the same pope that canonized Thomas Aquinas. So there's an interesting dimension here. And then also, I have many Swedish friends who've converted to Roman Catholicism because they say the Swedish Lutheran Church and most of Protestant, and this is now bringing it here to Europe, as just social, political, liberal institutions that don't even stand up for the same values that they hold to. So one of my good friends I've worked many years with in Sweden in early childhood development, she converted to Roman Catholicism. And, I still work together. I'm on her board. And some of my best trainers in Kenya for early childhood development are Roman Catholics. And so I'm not, their social teaching is very important. And that's what Rome is. Rome is a depository of so many things. There's so much to glean from it. Atomistically, I see no problem with it. But let us understand the system. And when I read Wolfgang Smith, I see obviously he is trying, he's working within that system, but bringing in Meister Eckhart into that system is an interesting discussion. So I just wanted to hold that thought, because I think we have two big subjects here, especially analyzing some of his thought, and then what we would think in Meister Eckhart, because it's not a mystical Dionysian. You have to understand the Roman Catholic mystical tradition is pseudo-Dionysius, which is a Syrian monk that had a way of the names of God that were apophatic. This is not what God is. God is not this. And so there was this Neoplatonic mixture with Dionysius, and then the Saint Denis, as the French would call him, with participation. So the whole Platonic tradition, and see, this was the thing. Thomas Aquinas in the First Vatican Council was affirmed for his philosophy. In a Second Vatican Council, we heard that these new theologians who were trying to bring in the participatory Dionysian aspects of the mystical that Thomas Aquinas were not really allowed. Ratzinger was part of that. People like Hans Urs von Balthasar, Karl Barth was his dialogue partner. He was kind of in the outside looking in. A great Jesuit named Henri de Lubac, is actually who John Milbank did his doctoral work on. So these are called the French Nouvelle theologians. And they had a new reading of Thomas that was against the Christian philosophy of Etienne Gilson, who most Reformed polemics against Roman Catholicism targets that, but they have no clue of what really was transpiring in the 20th century with this participatory, mystical, Dionysian Catholicism. Now, here brings in Walter Senner and Meister Eckhart. Walter Senner was always looking for why politically Meister Eckhart's thought was condemned in Agro Dominico. And that was in 1328. And it was by Pope John the 22nd. Now, John the 22nd canonized the thought of Thomas Aquinas in 1323. And Thomas Aquinas, when he died, he lived only 49 years. He wrote 8 million words. There was no one like Thomas Aquinas. He was a genius, the greatest mind, probably even greater mind than Augustine. But Thomas, was also indicted with these Aristotelians. You have to understand there was a lot of things hashed out in the University of Paris by the bishop, and there was condemnations on the Aristotelian thought. Now that's another whole subject. But eventually he was rehabilitated because
you mean on the debate between Plato and Aristotle? Is that what you mean?
Well, it's not even that. It's because Aristotle, even Plato wasn't really read then. Plato didn't make his comeback until the Renaissance. But that doesn't mean there weren't Neoplatonic elements. Like I said, the Dionysian corpus brought in these Christianized Neoplatonic elements. And of course, with the church fathers, there's a lot of that. So that was there. It was already distilled and processed within the church fathers. That's why orthodoxy and all these things have a tremendous advantage in these things, because they even go back further. However, Aristotle brought it back in a way of the scholastics in their distinctions. And see, this is the great difference with Roman Catholicism and its high scholasticism, and then Eastern Orthodoxy and its mysticism. And there's lots of nuance to that. But the Dionysian corpus is the closest it gets. Now, here's Meister Eckhart's thought was condemned, 28 articles. My mentor, Walter Senner, said Meister Eckhart would not have been condemned if he simply subscribed to Dionysian participation as a mystic. But Meister Eckhart intentionally said, this is not what I'm talking about. But he took Aristotle and Plato and turned it in on itself, put being, he did something that the early church fathers did. You were talking about being qua being, that's Aristotle's metaphysics. Anything Thomas Aquinas wrote on being was Aristotle. That's how he filtered it. So God is analogous to we are analogous to God's being in proportionality, the language of analogy, univocity, equivocation, all these types of things are components in developing metaphysical teaching. Causality, the four causes, participation now is the Platonic, in the unum, in the one and in the good, and then you have the true, the verum, and you have, of course, pulchrum, which is beauty. So that's from the Platonic tradition. And Thomas Aquinas did a very good job of synthesizing all that. I mean, it's just that he wrote 8 million words. Nobody couldn't read them, but read them all. I mean, his Summa Theologica was kind of a handbook, but his Summa Contra Gentiles was a polemic. But he wrote so many Questiones Disputates in a style that, I mean, once you get through all that material, you really see who he was. And of course, Thomas had a revival in the 1800s with the Vatican I, and because that was the Vatican's. They lost their power. The Garibaldi breached the walls of Rome, and he made the Italian state, and the Roman Catholic Church was held hostage in Rome for 50 years until Mussolini gave them their Vatican Treaty. Well, the Pope saw it. That's why he claimed infallibility, because he saw we lost it politically. But now we have to bring Thomas back. This was Leo the 13th. He brought Thomas back, and he brought Thomas Aquinas back, because he saw not only were we attacked politically, we were attacked by Darwin, we were attacked by the German higher critics. So the Roman Catholic Church gave it all they had with Vatican I, and they did a tremendous job of salvaging something. And so, and of course, it was also a polarization for many, because it was the ultimate synthesis of faith and reason. That's what Thomas did. So it's such an attractive, formidable system, and it had its admirers, but there were always its detractors, like Tyrrell, and then came the Jesuit novitiate named Martin Heidegger. He couldn't hack it with the Jesuits, but Martin Heidegger, he always held his cards close to his chest. Nobody knew what he was going on to. But what he did is he was already reading Meister Eckhart's sermons. He was taking Thomas's mystical tradition, and he throws out his teacher's phenomenological Husserl, the whole phenomenological tradition, which comes from the Austrians. I think you've had some experience with Brentano and the von Misesian extrapolations of that into economics. But Martin Heidegger put up the question, what is metaphysics? So he took Thomas Aquinas' Essay and Essentia. That was the great work of Thomas Aquinas. Being and essence, in God, being and essence are one, but in all other creatures, it's separate. So Martin Heidegger went and saw that being, das Sein, we have what he called in German Seinvergessenheit. We've lost what being means because we've made it an onto-theological thing. We've associated being with God. So he had an easy thing just to blow Thomas Aquinas up in asking the question, what is the metaphysics, and bringing being back into the actual human being there. But Meister Eckhart beat him to it. Meister Eckhart already blew up Thomas Aquinas because he brought being back to the fact in his first Parisian question that God is being. Now, everybody flew off the handle because they think, well, that's pantheism. No, he had his distinctions. This is Huck being this and that. So he was part of the German school of the Dominicans, and Albert the Great had this distinction, this or that being. And this or that being, this is the being of God is everything. But Meister Eckhart brought it back to the church fathers that being and knowing are the same in God. So God is a knowing being. He is intellectus. And that was the great distinction of the Dominicans. Now, this is a very
deep. So just a clarifying question.